All right, so design differences between something like an EC2 shape and the Outset. This is sort of a wireless EC2 clone from Xenix in Korea. It does have a slight truncation to the back hump, but it has more of the hump angle of the EC2, and it's just a little bit different overall. And it's enough to show why the Outset feels different and what changes about it. So the first thing I notice is that when using the Outset, I don't have a tendency for the side of my pinky to try and drag on the mouse pad very much. But with the Xenix, I have to curl my pinky more to keep it up off the pad. And that's just because the right side of the mouse here isn't as tall um, as it is on the Outset. And so this means you have less height for your pinky to sort of rest against on the right side of the mouse here. So it's a little bit more comfortable being a taller mouse to me. That's part of the reason I've always preferred bigger ergo mice with my hand size. So the Outset being taller has that additional advantage. It keeps the tilt angle of the EC series, but it has the height of an EC1, which I've always found significantly more comfortable. Now, the other thing is the more rounded back end. So on an EC2 type mouse, I find it difficult to try and kind of push the mouse forward because the way it's designed, your palm tends to kind of sit very much on top of the hump of the mouse and push down over a large area. And so it's hard to free up the mouse and push it forward in my grip if I need to aim upward to do small corrections. Whereas the Outset, this more rounded back end, means that when I'm holding it, you can see there's more of a gap here. And the palm contact is primarily kind of centered in this region of the mouse, which happens to have a hump angle that doesn't create as much friction against my palm. So it's actually a very easy mouse to free up and make adjustments with this way. So to my mind, if you use anything other than like a full palm grip where you can't do those adjustments anyway, if your fingers are bent at all, the Outset's shape is significantly better from a performance perspective. This is the other main reason I prefer this shape to like an EC1 or my Microsoft Pro IntelliMouse, because those, they take this very gradual hump slope here that the Outset has, and they just keep it going, and it goes all the way out and back, and that's where they get their like 130 millimeter length from, is this really long sloping back end, and you end up with like your whole palm sitting on top of it, and so it's just impossible to free the mouse up the way that you can with something like the Outset. um, and then to some extent, I find for a mouse this tall, I don't need the extra width that an EC1 tends to offer. So having it, the Outset be the same width as an EC2, even though I have 10.5 centimeter wide hands and pretty big palms, this still works very well for me from a comfort perspective. The mouse is plenty wide enough, and I'm not getting cramps trying to grab something that's too narrow. So overall, I think it's a significant improvement over the EC family of shapes if you're somebody who uses even slightly curled fingers while gaming. Um, and maybe if you have significantly smaller hands to the point where you don't need that extra height, or you're used to a mouse of the lower right side where you have to curl your pinky more anyway, and that's standard for you, then fair enough. But I'm not, and I like having a mouse like this that gives me some extra comfort in my grip. One final thing I forgot to mention is there is actually a difference in the angle of the hump between an EC2 and an EC1 shape. And the Outset uses, outside of its rounded rear end, it uses this more shallow slope from the EC1. And I prefer this slope greatly because the EC2, when I use it, basically my entire, from the base of my hand all the way up my forearm, is in contact with the mouse pad. So everything along here is actually touching the pad and dragging. And if I want to stop that from happening, I have to kind of get up on top of the mouse like this and pull it further into my palm, which at which point it really starts to feel too small, as you can see. Um, so I don't think that's a really great solution with this type of shape. And that happens because the slope here is steeper, and it forces my wrist further back, which, as you can see, pushes my wrist into the pad, the bottom of my wrist here, and also having to hold my wrist canted further back like this is less comfortable over time. So the more shallow slope on the outset, it's taller, but the top is flatter rather than steeper. And so it picks the back of my hand up naturally. And then the more rounded back end means that it's not filling up the entire length of my palm, so I can still free it up easily to do those vertical adjustments. But in the meantime, there's a tiny bit of contact right here on these parts of my palm, and yet my wrist here isn't dragging on the pad. So I get a much more consistent glide feeling, and I create less difference in perceived friction if my hand starts to get, or my wrist starts to get slightly sweaty. So this is a more consistent gaming experience this way. Um, yeah,